Saturday was fun. Now we just got to make sure that Cap pays up on his end of the bargain since he wagered me lunch, and I gave him my terms. Clearly tweeted them out the other night, Chicago cut in a Riverside table, but I was told Taco Bell yesterday is my future.
No. That doesn't work.
I agree. I was very clear. I have very high standards here.
Yeah.
I was very clear about what I wanted, and he's the one who suggested the wager, but nonetheless, I am excited. I do kind of wish my head coach down there would stop talking because now that he's puffing his chest out a little bit, the comments that he made about Iowa and them being a much harder team that they'll have to prepare for than the team last week. Let's just keep this thing rolling without the side comments that continue to come out of Kurt Signetti. Can we do that for a week or two?
That would sound very good. I think it would be a good option for the Bears up at Hallis Hall as well. Feel good about what you did against the Dallas Cowboys, but make sure you go to Las Vegas and you're ready to take care of business.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach because, not that, not for nothing, they're not saying anything of the sort. I think that Ben Johnson made it very clear with how quickly he was ready to move on from that after the game, saying, yeah, we'll celebrate tonight, but we're behind the 8 ball. Because they are. They don't want to be 1-3 coming out of this, going into the bye. You're not going to feel great if that's the case. But if you're 2-2 and have stuff to build on, have some tangible things you can change in week 5 when you've got a couple days next week when guys are in the building and then you break for the bye, then you're in a much better spot going into the back end of your schedule, which I know starts so much earlier for them because they go to Washington on Monday Night Football in week 6, but they'd be in a good spot if they can make all those things happen and come away with a second straight dub.
It was interesting watching the team celebrate after Ben Johnson was given the game ball. And we were having the conversation. If Flus had done that chant, then everyone would have rolled their eyes. But I said the difference, though, is that like Flus was always doing some really very corny things, whereas typically we see Ben Johnson pretty intense. And I think that's what the players see as well. So the fact that they were able to loosen him up, I think showed a different kind of, all right, we just might be believing what you're selling.
That was authentic to who he is because, he runs red hot at times. We saw it from the beginning in OTAs when he's calling players out for lining up wrong in 7-on-7 drills to that moment right there. And even moments in the game, I know that the broadcast would show him on the sideline. I think it was either Jeff Darlington or Tom Rinaldi after the game asking Caleb Arome, like, we didn't see your head coach smile much and you were up by 31-14 at one point. That's who he is. And I think the reason they can buy into it is because they haven't seen him switch up. They haven't seen him have different personalities, so to speak. Like, who he is who he's been since he got here. And that's much easier to buy into when you're confident in that. Like, Matt Eberflus is really tepid in his approach. He didn't want to say the wrong thing. He didn't want to say anything at all a lot of times. And I think that players, weren't exactly sure who to follow if your head coach can't have an identity that breeds confidence in the rest of the team. What Ben is doing is showing these players, you guys follow me. I know that I'm going to be on you, and it's going to work. Like I know they keep saying this, but the proof of concept was there the other day, and that's important for players to see. What are we buying into? Is it actually showing up in games? Because the proof of concept with Eberflus was supposed to be this hits principle. Yeah. Did that ever show up where guys were like, oh no, hits, hustle, intensity, the ball, S, whatever S stood for.
We know what S stood for. Yeah.
It's just like, it's stuff like that you never, if you didn't see, I'm buying into this, here's a direct result, it's hard to get behind that for 17 games. I think with Ben Johnson, you saw the intensity of him breaking down the huddle, of the good, better, best thing, that it seems to be a rallying cry for them. That's something that these players bought into, and I looked at them all rally around him, kind of mosh him in a little bit of a semicircle the other day. You didn't see that with Matt Eberflus. And another thing I'll mention, too, is that when I go down there after the game, like usually for a win, you're waiting outside the locker room a little bit longer. You'll hear music. You'll hear, just take a little bit longer, and it's loud. I didn't hear any of that. And it's not to say that they weren't celebrating in the locker room. Very clearly they were in that video with the game ball situation. But they also know that they are 1-2 right now. They're behind the 8 ball, as Ben said post-game. And I think that the players, if the coach is preaching that, the players are going to buy into that, and that's how they're going to carry themselves into the next week.
Yeah, it's such a good point. Courtney, Ben mentioned quickly when he met the media yesterday, made us all aware, and we all knew that his team they were underdogs in Vegas on Sunday. Is that on point for Ben Johnson? Is that just kind of who he is?
Well, I think they opened, correct me if I'm wrong here, either opened as a pick'em or they opened as, I think the line might have shifted a little bit. They're 1.5-point underdogs right now on the road. And that's him saying it like that. Once again, we're going on the road to a place where we are not favored. And they were not favored by, I think it was 6 or 7 in Detroit. We saw what that game became. It's just a way to prove, like, to your team, you can't get comfortable. Like, you won one game against a Dallas team that isn't very good on defense. And that's not to take away from what Caleb Williams showed, what Ben Johnson showed as a play caller, being able to distribute the ball to a lot of different playmakers. But I think he says stuff like that to show that it's going to be an uphill battle, that they can't let their foot off the gas in any way. And there's a lot to fix. Like, I mean, you come away from a run, a rushing performance that yielded 3.7 yards a carry outside of the 19-yard drive where they had 11 straight runs. That wasn't very good. You come away with your defense on the back end looking like it could adjust, but certainly your pass rush doesn't come alive. Like, there's all of those things that I think Ben Johnson is using to show you have so much more to accomplish, and don't get comfortable yet, because you are going to be underdogs in a lot of these games. People aren't going to buy into what we're selling yet until they can start doing it time and time again. But even at that point, I don't think he's going to be the head coach who rides on. He may come across as highly confident, borderline cocky, but I don't think for this team, until they get to a point where they can play with the sort of swagger that a Detroit team was playing with last night, he's going to have that same message.
This is another opportunity for Ben Johnson's coaching staff to get these guys ready for a game in which their opponent is going to be really fired up. I mean, in Vegas, they're talking about, is this rock bottom? Has this team hit rock bottom? When you start hearing that team can either go two ways. They can get their what together and come out and hit you like the Lions were.
And they're
hitting.
very well coached with Pete Carroll, too. Or they should be.
Just like the Lions came back and took it to the Bears. This is another opportunity, like, look outside of just the Bears building on it, but did they learn from the last time when they were not ready for a game in which their opponent was going to come out with something to prove?
I think that, where the Raiders are right now, there's a lot of talk. Ashton Genty's going to be the guy, and he's going to get a lot of touches, and he's going to be the focal point of their offense. He's not right now. Is he getting a lot of touches? Yeah, he got 17 carries, and he had the 18-yard run, but he's not generating a ton of production. They're trying to show that the way that they built this roster, the way that they, play football works, and it hasn't so far. The score was not indicative in Washington of how not close that game was. So I'd imagine they've got a lot that they're trying to bring in here to a team that they probably feel really evenly matched with. I mean, I know the Bears just won a game, but there's a lot of things that have to be fixed, and they probably are more on par with a team like Vegas, certainly than a team like Minnesota or like the Lions. And that's a good measuring stick to show the growth process of the teams that you can beat, the teams that you match up well with, and how that, can carry throughout the season to where you can keep upping your level of competition as you go about. So I'd imagine, it's week 4. The Raiders aren't just going to roll over and die and let the Bears, walk in there and walk away with a win without putting up a fight for it. I mean, that's a talented coaching staff. And right now the Chargers game, that goes down on Geno Smith because of the multiple interceptions and some frankly stupid decisions that he put the ball into. And, beyond that, the Patriots game, what happened this past week, like, they're still trying to figure it out, but it's not to say that they're poorly coached or, that they're not, capable of beating this Bears team. They absolutely feel like they are. And that's not a place of hubris to think that, I would not say.
Courtney, we saw Luther Burden become an even larger portion of the game plan, and it's not humongous. I still think he's 25-30% snaps he's getting. Do you expect that number to go up as he has continued to perform?
Yeah, and I expect the defensive attention now that he broke out in that game. He's only the second receiver from this rookie class to have a 100-yard game, him and Ted McMillan in Carolina. Now they're going to have to start accounting for him. because of what he showed in those 3 catches and in going over 100 yards and the flea flicker and the touchdown and all of that. Like that's a performance that puts the rest of the league, I wouldn't say on notice, but it turns heads. Like, oh, wait, this is the guy that they drafted 39th overall that they barely used the first 2 weeks. He can play. Not that we had any question that he could, but trying to find the role for him in this offense. It's not going to look like this every single week where the ball distribution is spread around as much as it is. They capitalized on a weak secondary that played a ton of zone, and there was no pass rush to speak of. So what happens when that's not the case? When and I think that the Raiders can rush the passer far better than what the Cowboys were able to show. I mean, Max Crosby alone is their version of, that'd be their version of Micah Parsons if Micah Parsons was still in Dallas, and that's a different challenge. So when Luther Burden comes into the game plan this week, he's shown he has the trust of Caleb Williams and the trust of the head coach to put him in those situations where he's not going to outrun Caleb Williams on the flea flicker. Caleb said after the game that during practice he kept underthrowing him during the week. But like knowing that and then knowing how that play turned out, that's even more trust that you put in your rookie receiver, that he was able to adjust on the fly no matter what was going to happen there based on how they had practiced it and still produce. And he's a playmaker. He wants the ball, and he's got a swagger about him that I think is a really good thing for that receiver room that's highly competitive, loaded with their top 3 guys, and they're going to be fighting for the ball, and he's certainly now in the mix where he is deserving to be in that conversation as somebody you can trust on offense.
You mentioned it with Max Crosby, and they have more of a pass rush than the Cowboys did. So is the offensive line, could it possibly be that they are gelling and they're starting to come together 4 weeks into the season? Or is it as simple as they really weren't threatened much by the Cowboys?
Probably a little bit of both. I do think that Braxton Jones not giving up a pressure after 12 the first 2 games, which was the high along the offensive line, that's a good start to see. Like, we're 2 weeks away from the bye. Do they make a change at left tackle during the bye? That was the question coming out of the Detroit game with how we saw Theo Benedette in there late in the game. It wasn't to protect Braxton Jones or the offensive line. That was, hey, we're going to put him out here because these could be some meaningful snaps at the end of the day. But I would you like to think 3 weeks in that they're gelling? Sure. But you even heard Drew Dahlman talk about it yesterday that, they handled things better. Some of the games up front, not allowing guys to be in as many one-on-one situations, helping each other out there, but they still got a lot of work to do. And for as good as the pass protection was on Sunday, and Ben Johnson said the reason that Caleb gets 0 sacks is because of how good the pass protection was, and he's right. It still wasn't perfect. Like, they had a 65% pass block win rate. That's middle of the pack for offensive line performances in Caleb's 20 starts. I think he made them right in some instances, and Drew Dahlman kind of alluded to that too, where there'd be some moments that Caleb could bail the offensive line out of him taking a sack, and that's growth on the quarterback. That's a good thing, but I thought the offensive line played better. They certainly 11 straight runs. When you're just putting your nose in the ground and grinding it forward and run blocking, like, you get in a rhythm there. So that certainly helps what your line's doing up front and their continuity and being able to play off of one another. But I still think there's a ways to go once we see them play against some better pass rushers.
Was this as in control as you've seen Caleb as a Bears quarterback, whether it's getting out of the huddle in the appropriate amount of time, getting to the line and able to shift and motion and pointing out the mic and pointing to potential blitzers and maybe even setting some protections? Is this as kind of in control and calm as you've seen him look, Courtney?
Yeah, and I think that was even more so than, I know his numbers, like touchdown-wise, passing yards, look similar to what happened last year when they beat the Jaguars in London and they're riding into their bye week, feeling pretty good. I get why fans want to compare those two performances, but what I noticed is what you said, Waddle, right away. Like, he was at the line of scrimmage with like 12, 13 seconds, and I think Ben Johnson pointed that out, that their operation of getting the play call, getting in and out of the huddle was so much better than it was, the first 2 weeks of the season where the clock was winding down and, you're trying to, you're trying to get to it like quicker. Yeah. And, like that game in Jacksonville, they scored in the 2-minute drill. Like there was 17 seconds left or something when he hit Kmet for that touchdown against the Jaguars. So yes, there were some similarities from his last best performance, highest touchdown day, to where he was now. I think he looked more comfortable, though, operating from the pocket. To me, that was as big of a takeaway as any number he could have put up, that he was comfortable when he was being asked to play within structure, which was a big portion of the day. And that's what they've been coaching him to do. That's what they want him to do. So more than anything, the yards per attempt, the QBR, the touchdowns that he threw while, staying inside the pocket, I think that was just as important as anything else that we saw from Caleb Williams. And that, to me, when I look at the overall body of work and the comfort of the quarterback, that was the most impressive part.
Yeah. Boy, that Lions team looked great last night. I know you keep your eye on the entire NFL, not just the Bears. But, boy, they have made a statement in each of the last 2 weeks, have they not?
Isn't it a little funny? And maybe I'm not the only one who thought this. So the Bears' third quarter drive that eats up 9 minutes, 54 seconds of clock, 19 plays, 76 yards. It's like, all right, we saw you do that. Yep. Hold our beer. Yep. Here's a 98-yard drive in 10-something minutes, and how efficient they were, how well they ran the ball. The Lions obviously are in a different class than a lot of teams. That win, to me, last night, the win that they had over the Bears, 90 points in their last 2 games. The pass rush yesterday, 7 different times they sacked Lamar Jackson. That stuff is so impressive, and it shows you that they're still very much on par with Philly, on par with Green Bay. Hell, maybe they're even a step ahead of Green Bay, because I don't think Jared Goff throws an interception in the situation that Jordan Love did with 3-something left in the game. That's about as dominant as it gets, and it feels like they took that one personally.
Yeah,
3 fourth downs they went for, running the freaking triple option last night. You think Ben
awesome.
Johnson saw that? It's like, hey, I had that on my play sheet at one point. Now I'm going to have to wait to run that so people don't think I'm copying the Lions. All jokes aside, the creativity out there on offense was to see them do that against a Baltimore defense that was down. Madubuike, Kyle Van Noy wasn't playing, Jair Alexander wasn't playing. They're down bad on defense, but that was still a really dominant performance for the Lions that makes you think, okay, the pecking order in the NFC right now, Eagles, Lions, Green Bay, maybe then draw a line with the other teams that are 3-0, but you still have some questions on, the San Francisco 49ers, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But, man, that was as dominant as it gets.
Yeah, there's some red asses up in Detroit. They want to make sure everyone realizes, hey, we lost our coordinators, but we are a talented team. And Dan Campbell's in charge, and he can identify guys that can fill the roles of Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. Just been really impressive. It's been fun to watch. I hate to see it because they're in our division, but, wow, a couple of statement wins for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, that was such a fun game. It's 21-21 in the fourth quarter, and, it's certainly not fun if you're a Ravens fan when you see all of a sudden Derrick Henry has this case of fumbleitis, which, the stat that I found so staggering was in 136 games before the first 3 that we've seen this season, he had 2 fourth-quarter fumbles that he lost. In the first 3 games, he's had 2 fourth-quarter fumbles that he's lost. The one last night wasn't as bad as what happened against Buffalo when that one leads to a field goal and the Buffalo one led to a touchdown. But, watching these 2 teams beat up on each other and, what it plays into in Week 4. Somebody's going to have a 1-3 record between the Ravens and the Chiefs. And that 1-3 record, the Bears obviously hope to be 2-2, could very well be the record that Chicago has going into the bye. So the balance of power right now in the early season slate that we have to pick through here in the NFL is not what a lot of people would have expected.
You're right. Courtney, great stuff as always.
Thanks
so
Courtney.
much.